afternoon, and thank you all so much for joining us for what we know will be a very insightful conversation on the state of higher education with the esteemed chairman of the House and Education Labor Committee, Bobby Scott. My name is Tamara Heiler, and I'm the director of our education program here at Third Way, and I am very honored and grateful to have the opportunity to introduce Chairman Scott for this afternoon's conversation. Chairman Scott has proudly represented Virginia's 3rd Congressional District in the House of Representatives since 1993. And during this time, he has become the Democratic leader and North Star for all things education in the House. As chairman of the Education and Labor Committee and member of the Committee on the Budget, he works every day to advance an agenda that improves equity in education and makes post-secondary education more accessible, affordable, and valuable for all. He authored and led the successful markup of a comprehensive reauthorization of the Higher Education Act last Congress, known as the College Affordability Act, and he played an integral role in getting crucial COVID relief funding for higher education across the finish line multiple times throughout the pandemic, most recently in the American Rescue Plan. Now he is on the cusp of ushering in historic investments through the forthcoming Build Back Better Act, and it is clear that Chairman Scott knows that a commitment to improving both equity and student outcomes in higher education is integral to the long-term well-being of our country. On that note, we know that 2021 was another unexpectedly rough year for everyone, including the higher education sector. Colleges and universities from coast to coast have had to continue navigating really difficult decision points to keep their students safe and their bottom lines intact. And we know that students of all ages and backgrounds have had to make even more difficult decisions about whether or not they could afford to enroll or re-enroll in college during this time of economic and personal hardship. Luckily, we know that despite some of these challenges, polling demonstrates again and again that most Americans from all walks of life and political parties continue to see the value in higher education and want to see Congress take bold steps to make sure the system provides a real return on investment for all those who enroll. We know that 2022 will bring more challenges, especially as the payment pause on student loans is set to end in just a few short weeks, and as colleges continue to face enrollment dips and completion gaps in a post-pandemic world. However, we know that the disruption to the status quo that COVID-19 has brought upon us also creates big opportunities to reimagine how we can make the system more affordable, equitable, and valuable for everyone involved. So how will that happen? This is my cue to now turn it over to Chairman Scott, who will deliver brief remarks on the state of higher education as he sees it, followed by a Q&A with Third Way's Vice President of Social Policy and Politics, Lanae Erickson. Just a friendly reminder that today's conversation is being recorded and will be on the record. So with that, Chairman Scott, thank you so much again for your time, and please feel free to take it from here.
Well, thank you, Tamara, for the kind introduction, and thank you for thank everyone for being with us today. I also want to thank Lanae and the Third Way team for their work on behalf of the nation's students and families. The Democratic Caucus features a wide range of views on higher education policy, but one common denominator is that all of us want to expand access to quality higher education. And that shared goal is based on the evidence that a high-quality post-secondary degree remains the surest pathway to financial security and a rewarding career. Unfortunately, while most jobs in the modern economy require an education past the high school level, we know that a quality post-secondary education remains out of reach for many Americans. And so this year, the fallout from COVID-19 continued to exacerbate the challenges for students, institutions, and families. As research shows, the sudden shift to remote education worsened persistent academic achievement gaps, particularly for first-time college attendees, low-income students, and students of color. And during the campus closures, students' access to education, housing, and career opportunities was disrupted, exposing them to hunger, homelessness, and other hardships. So institutions of higher education have also faced significant financial strain with the people dropping out and increased expenditures. Public and private institutions across the country have had to grapple with declines in enrollment on top of severe revenue losses. And in response, Congress, with the support of advocates like the Third Way, took decisive action to support institutions, students, and families. We first passed the CARES Act and then the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, which together delivered over $35 billion in direct aid to institutions and their students. Those bills made meaningful changes to preserve students' access to work study and prevent them from losing Pell eligibility if they were forced to pause their education during the pandemic. This year, we've continued to deliver urgently needed relief for students and institutions. In March, congressional Democrats passed the American Rescue Plan, providing an additional $40 billion in relief for higher education. This funding has helped institutions reopen their campuses safely, address the urgent needs of students, and cover the added costs of operating during a pandemic. Importantly, at least half of the funding that institutions have received through the American Rescue Plan must be used to provide emergency aid for students. Across the country, we've seen the American Rescue Plan make a meaningful difference in the lives of students and provide a critical financial lifeline for the institutions. Now we're turning our attention to the future of higher education. Last month, the House passed the Build Back Better Act, which makes critical investments to lower the cost of college. The bill provides more than $20 billion to increase the value of Pell Grants, which is a cornerstone of student financial aid, establish retention and completion grants to help students complete their education, help train new teachers and address teacher shortages, and deliver targeted investments for historically Black colleges and universities, tribal colleges and universities, and minority serving institutions. Taken together, these provisions represent a major investment in higher education over the past year and a half, when the implementation of Build Back Better will provide even more investments. However, even as we work to send the Build Back Better Act to the president's desk, we know that a lot more still needs to be done. So looking ahead to 2022, the committee remains dedicated to addressing the systemic challenges in our higher education system, and we look forward to seeing what additional progress we can make in the near future. For example, we'll continue working to lower the cost of college by expanding need-based aid and reversing the chronic state disinvestment in higher education. Increasing funding for student aid and protecting state investments would mean that fewer students would need to take out educational loans. We must also work with the Department of Education to ensure that the loans for those students who need to borrow are cheaper and easier to manage. The Education Department's current negotiating rulemaking session is a major opportunity to help struggling student borrowers. For example, expanding eligibility for more generous income-driven repayment plans will provide important relief to student borrowers and their families. We'll also continue working to provide quality higher education by strengthening oversight and accountability for predatory for-profit schools and ensuring that institutions provide students with the support to graduate and transition to a rewarding career. And we'll maintain our commitment to helping students of all backgrounds succeed by working to expand proven student support systems and investing in public institutions, community colleges, HBCUs, tribal colleges, and other minority serving institutions. As the committee works towards these goals, we'll continue to ensure that we draw from one of our most important lessons that was reaffirmed this year, and that is, when we invest in higher education, we invest in the future of our communities and our economy. So today I look forward to discussing the historic steps we took this year, the state of our higher education system as we transition to the new year, and our opportunities to help every American access an affordable, quality higher education. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairman Scott. It is so great to be here with you. More fun when we can do it in person, but thank you for joining us virtually today. That was a fantastic overview of how much has gotten done over the past couple of years under your helm, but we know that this last year and a half, almost 2 years, has been just so difficult for so many people in so many ways. And I'm curious, we know that not all students are set up equally for success in our higher education system. And to me, COVID has just exacerbated that and really shone a light on that painful reality. So when you're looking out over what we hope is post-pandemic future now, what are you most worried about when it comes to supporting students, families, institutions as they kind of rebuild from what we've all gone through?
Well, one of the first things we want to look at is equal opportunity. We see in K through 12, achievement gaps have been exacerbated, which suggests that access to college will be a challenge. So we need to make sure that we address the achievement gaps and make sure that those at the bottom of those achievement gaps get the supports they need to be able to make it into and through college. That's why those completion grants are so important. We found that emergency grants and other supports for students that are struggling, a little support can help students stay in school and complete their course rather than just dropping out, which has a lot of problems, not the least of which is they drop out, they don't have the credentials, and they do have that big fat student loan. So we want to make sure that more people have the opportunity to go to college or higher education, and once they get there, they can actually succeed.
Yeah, let me just follow up on the COVID piece for a minute. I know we've really invested in supporting both institutions and students over the past couple of years through this crisis. Have you seen some good examples of ways that institutions have supported students in this time? I know you've had hearings on how they've used these funds, the HERF funds, and additional funds that have been given out. What innovative or really good practices have you seen people using that you think really goes to the heart of what we're talking about here with equity and supporting students?
Well, some of the schools have helped students pay their bills, which helps not only the student, actually helps the institution. You convert bills that I guess uncollectible accounts into cash on hand, which helps the institution, but also helps the student. A lot of institutions have policies where they don't let people register for the next semester unless they've cleaned up some of their past due accounts, and that problem has been solved. There are a lot of colleges incurring massive expenses trying to deal with the pandemic, testing, quarantines in this situation, and that's if you are responding appropriately, that's not cheap. And so a lot of the money goes to trying to run a college during a pandemic. So the student support working during a pandemic are two of the major expenses. Dealing with distance learning. A lot of colleges are making sure that everybody has a computer and some kind of way to connect. Otherwise, your college education comes to an end if you've got distance learning courses and no access, no broadband in your area, or your family can't afford broadband. All of a sudden, you can't do your homework. If you don't have a computer, obviously, you're not going to get very far at all. So a lot of the individualized supports have made it possible for students to stay in and continue their studies, and a lot of those, as I said, are not cheap, and that's where the support it's been really helpful to institutions.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I know as chairman, you've been really a fierce advocate for defrauded borrowers that, have been put into debt by predatory colleges or left on the hook by sudden school closures. What progress have you seen over your career in terms of strengthening oversight to make sure that colleges aren't setting students back worse than they were before they started? And what do you think we still need to do to make sure that isn't the outcome when someone enrolls in higher education?
Well, a lot of the for-profits were just taking people's money and providing very little education. We've heard some job coaches have advised people to leave off the fact that they even went to some colleges because they'd be less likely to get a job with that nonsense on their resume than if they just left it off. Well, that's a nice message when the people have spent all that money and incurred all those loans to have a credential that's not only worthless, but maybe even counterproductive. But we've seen a lot of the schools that were providing worthless education close because of some of the fairly easy to apply proposals like the 90-10 requirement, where at least 10% of your revenue has to come from somewhere other than the federal government. If all you're doing is collecting Pell Grants and student loans and signing people up, overcharging them, and nobody thinks that your program is worth actually paying out of pocket, it says something about your institution. Requiring at least 10% to come from sources outside of the federal government has frankly caused a lot of them to close. There's one loophole that we just closed. When you say money from the federal government, that's usually that's been defined traditionally as Pell Grants and student loans. The GI Bill benefits was not included in that. So a lot of schools learned that they could target veterans and get them in to fill out their 10%. Well, they're back doing what we were trying to avoid. And they were getting all of their money just from Pell Grants, student loans, and now GI Bills, GI benefits. Well, we close that loophole. You can get GI benefits, but that counts towards the 90. You still got to come up with somewhere else with the 10, and a lot of them are hurting because, frankly, their product wasn't anything anybody was buying. So we I think we'd let the marketplace take care of a lot of it, because if nobody wants to buy the product, it's gonna take care of itself. We're also doing oversight, pressing the Department of Education and the accreditors to make sure that the accrediting system only accredits schools as actually worthy of the federal investment. We're finding some of these schools were accredited right up to the week they closed. All of a sudden, tens of thousands of students are left in a lurch because the school just collapsed. Well, what in the world were the accreditors doing? And what kind of education were they getting? Now, the students, at least now, are taking advantage of what's called borrow defense. If you've been defrauded and a school up and closes on you, you don't have to pay back your student loan. Now, the Biden administration is enforcing that provision. We had a great deal of trouble getting the Trump administration to move at all on that. You had tens of thousands of students clearly defrauded, clearly entitled to relief, getting nothing. They came up with some formula where you weren't going to get relief. If you got a job, you weren't going to get relief. Some of them, if you got any job, you weren't going to get relief. And that wasn't fair to the students. And so there are a lot of things that those who are providing no benefit and defrauding the students, we're seeing a great progress in them collapsing on their own weight and not being able to fulfill, to satisfy the 90-10 formula, particularly since we have now eliminated the GI benefits as one of the ways they could escape scrutiny. So most of them are closing. There are some good ones, and one of the challenges is trying to separate the good from the bad. I mean, there's some private colleges and some state colleges. Private colleges charge a little more. Duke charges more than University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Stanford charges more than University of California, Berkeley. I mean, you know, they charge more, but it's within range. Some of these schools were charging tuition, it's just jaw-dropping, and providing, you know, almost meaningless credentials. And I think we're getting to the point where they're not able to survive without. We also apply what's called gainful employment. You have to get jobs that allow you to pay off your loans. Or you have to be able to satisfy that. You have to be placing the students. The combination with those, real flim-flam operations are not able to survive.
Yeah, you know, we do a lot of public opinion research on lots of topics, but on higher ed in particular. And whenever we talk to people about those cases, they say, who was the watchdog that was supposed to be watching out for these folks? You know, and you talk to them about the schools that have been accredited until the week before they close, and people are pretty aghast because they think that is what accreditors should be paying attention to.
Well, we've been pushing accreditors. Accreditors have been tended to look as much disproportionately at the financials to see if they can stay open. They, in my judgment, haven't looked enough in the academic quality. And the one thing that they don't want to touch is the appropriateness of the tuition. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was at one school, in a culinary school, where it was an 18-month course, and they were charging $50,000.
Wow.
That's what I said. You know,
I hope that food is really good.
You know, and maybe it's worth it, but the creditor ought to look to see if that's reasonable.
Right.
And we haven't been able to get them there, but we're still pushing them. And with the Department of Education, somebody's got to look at the appropriateness of that of the tuition, because frankly, that tuition is being paid for with federal money. If it was just all commercial, that'd be one thing. But we're talking about Pell Grants and student loans. And if you're going to be accessing Pell Grants and student loans, and we're going to essentially be financing it, you have an obligation to be providing a reasonable, at a reasonable fee, a good product at a reasonable fee. And it's been a challenge trying to get the Department of Education and the accreditors to look at the tuition.
Yeah. So let's turn to, as you said, kind of the future of higher education. And I know that I and many folks on this call are very excited and anticipatory that we're going to have a big investment in this Build Back Better Act, that we're going to be able to get that across the finish line. Maybe not before Christmas, but who knows? But shortly, nonetheless. And you know, I'm curious about how you think about the higher ed investments that are in this bill. You know, the first of its kind college completion fund, supporting HBCUs and MSIs, and the Pell Grant boost. How do you think those investments will kind of pair together to really ensure that more students are able to get to and through to their college degree across the country?
Well, one of the things we were hoping to be able to do would be free community college, but that was clearly one of the victims when we went from not 6 trillion to 3.5 trillion, but 3.5 trillion to 1.5 to 2 trillion. A lot of things that we had thought we will be able to do, obviously you can't do with the top line dropping like that. So, but free community college is obviously aspirational. In the meanwhile, we were able to get, we had a increase in the Pell Grant. Last year, we had another increase in the Pell Grant in Build Back Better. A couple other jumps in the Pell Grant. We'll have the maximum Pell Grant clearly covering the cost of community college. That will make it free for those that really need it. It's nice because of the universal need for higher education, just like K through 12 is free. We're going to have universal pre-K is free. The 2 years of post-secondary needs to be universally available. But we're chipping away at it, and I think we're chipping away at the right part. We're making sure that those least able to afford will be able to afford with the with Pell Grants. So that's a major part of it. It's not higher education. Some include it, some don't, but job training is part of post-secondary education. It's not college or university, but a lot of people do extremely well with apprenticeships or other technical schools, and we have to make sure, particularly at our community colleges, that those courses are available. And to the extent they're available, people can gain a skill and move up significantly on the income scale because they've got that that skill. And the courses, I mean, some of them like 8, 12, 16 weeks, couple of months, where you can increase your earning capacity 25, 50, even 100% just by gaining a skill. And you know, so, a welder, for example, does extremely well. You're willing to do any overtime, you can do extremely well as a welder, and those are hard to find in Southeast Virginia, where we have a lot of shipbuilding. But there are a lot of skills like that where there's a very high need. Our apprenticeship legislation not only wants to expand the existing registered apprenticeships and the ones, you know, like electricians and carpenters, things like that, but expand the apprenticeships into healthcare jobs or technology or other jobs that are not traditionally thought of as apprenticeships, and make those available where people can gain skills after high school. So all of that is our view of post-secondary, but our college is mostly focused on access. People can't afford it. The Pell Grant hadn't come anywhere close to keeping up with tuition when it started. When President Johnson signed the Higher Education Act, he said, admit that any student from any state could apply to any college and not be turned away because the family is poor. And it was true. I mean, the Pell Grant covered about 70-some% of the cost of going to college. You get a little part-time job during the school year, summer job, and you could, quote, work your way through college without borrowing any money. Now the Pell Grant doesn't cover 30%. And where's the rest come? You can't, and if you're full to 40 hours a week, you can't afford to go to college. And so the rest is student loans. And we need to get the Pell Grant back to where it pays a significant chunk where you can actually go to college. If you're willing to work 15 hours a week, you ought not have to borrow any money. Now, if you don't want to work, you just want to go full time, you might have to borrow a little bit, particularly for living expenses. But going to college ought to be an affordable thing to do, particularly since your future opportunities are so defined by the level of your education.
Yeah, and as someone who definitely would not have been able to access higher education without a Pell Grant, I'm very appreciative of your advocacy there and your focus on those who need it most. So turning to kind of the broader future, you had a comprehensive HEA rewrite all ready to go last Congress, and it was a fantastic bill that we supported and worked on with your staff, and a lot of the really key provisions that go beyond what we can see in reconciliation. And so I'm curious, when, if ever, are we going to be able to do an HEA reauthorization, looking in your crystal ball? And do you think that that's necessary in order to kind of take the next step? Obviously, Build Back Better has so many great investments in it, but there's some things you just can't do with the bird rules that I know you and we have seen as priorities.
Well, there are a lot of things that we have done already. Affordability is the first challenge, and to the extent that we can do just that, make it more affordable, we're going to do. A comprehensive rewrite is going to be challenging under the present political atmosphere that we're working under. We're having trouble doing a lot of this stuff under reconciliation that only takes a simple majority in the Senate, including the vice president if necessary. And so it's going to be tough, but we're going to continue doing everything we can on affordability that we can. We made a lot of progress, so we'll continue that. If we can get a consensus on a comprehensive bill, we'll do it, but who knows?
Yeah, well, I will hold you to that. I will come back and help you guys write the comprehensive bill whenever we think it can get done. So okay. I'm curious about, you mentioned the political climate. Are there any issues within kind of the higher ed sphere that you think we can get support across the aisle on, that there's more, either, at least some limited support within the Republican caucus, or, or broader, just more universal support? I know that there was not for a lot of the pieces that were in the College Affordability Act, and that was part of what this, the Senate's 60 vote threshold holds us back. But what are there moments that you have been able to have conversations with your colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle about improvements in higher ed?
Well, on job training, there's a lot more opportunity.
Got it.
We had success. There's some technical things about apprenticeships that the Trump administration came in and complicated. We had a pretty good bipartisan operation going. Then they threw in a couple of issues that kind of destroyed that. But I think on things like job training generally, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA, which is the way we do job training, it's easier to get bipartisan support on job training because most of the decisions are local. We set up a board and tell them to figure out what jobs are needed and what training people need, and the answers to those questions in Southeast Virginia, where we have a lot of shipbuilding, will be different from those that they have in Kansas and Nevada and Chicago. And so those have to be made locally. So since all the complicated questions are going to be resolved locally, we just set up a structure and give them enough money so that they can send the students to community college or provide the training to make sure the training gets done. One of the limitations there is just money. The more money you have, the more training you can do. There's a program where you can get vouchers to go to the community college. More vouchers you have, the more students can take advantage of. Virginia has community colleges have a lot of little programs where, 6, 8, 16 weeks, healthcare, technology, the building trades, where you can learn a skill and leave after a short period of time. But these programs cost a couple of $1,000s. You've seen all those reports that said the average person can't come up with $400 in an emergency. Well, if it costs $3,000, unless you have some way to pay for it, you might as well have said $100,000. Now, the complication there is that the Pell Grant will pay for programs that lead to a college degree. If all it leads to is a good job, you can't get a Pell Grant. Well, we're trying to fix that. If it leads to a good job, we want to figure out whether you call it a Pell Grant or some other kind of program. If it leads to a good job, you ought to get some kind of funding. The trick there is you don't want people to rip you off. You want a good quality program, and you don't want people setting up little storefronts where they take all your money and provide worthless credentials. And I think if we work through the WIOA boards, they're not going to refer people to worthless programs. So I think you can get some control, or the community colleges, you can get some control over it, but we can't open it up like we do the Pell Grants, where everybody with an accredited program gets free access to the federal money.
Yeah, particularly as the accredited programs, as we noted, are not all themselves of quality.
We're not going to make that. We're not going to make that mistake again.
Yeah,
so I think the things we can do in the job training, for which you're talking about, can we work together on things? I think that's one area where we can work together. There was a poll taken a couple of years ago where I think the question was something to the effect of is a college education a good thing or a bad thing? And 2/3 of Republicans said it was a bad thing. Well, it's hard to get a lot of bipartisan support if that's the constituency they're representing. Because access to college is expensive. And if 2/3 of their constituents don't think it's a worthwhile investment, it's kind of hard to work on that. Now, job training, I think you can get a pretty good consensus. That's a good thing.
Yeah. And as you pointed out, there's a huge investment in apprenticeships in the Build Back Better bill, which is just phenomenal. We're huge supporters of the apprenticeship program, and so glad to see that included in the bill.
Not nearly as big as it was when we had 3.5 trillion, but
everything shrunk from where we wanted it to be. We were hoping for 62 billion for college completion fund, but we're thrilled to see 500 million and think that it can go a long way towards helping folks get those graduation hats. So I know we only have a couple minutes left, so I'll just, we've talked a lot about the hard things, the things that are challenges, and where we go from here on higher education and supporting students. We know that there's been a lot of disruption over the past couple of years, but there's also been a lot of changes and innovations. Can you just close with something that you think makes you feel optimistic about where we're headed as a country on higher education, or where the higher education system is headed in terms of how it serves our students?
Well, I think there's a discussion going on about what higher education should be. And there's a consensus that we ought to have higher education available for job readiness. And so you have a lot of online opportunities where you can get your skills online and be ready for jobs. There's also the idea that the value of a 4-year on-campus liberal arts college degree, most of the value that you get out of that has nothing to do with what you learn in the classroom. You come out a better person, but it's not just what you learn in the classroom. There's just something about that process, and you don't want to lose that. But there's less enthusiasm for funding that than there is for something that has a measurable job connection. But we should not lose the idea that just a liberal arts, there's something good about a liberal arts education. And that's probably going to be one of the challenges to keep the funding available for that kind of an education.
Oh, no. Well, I'm sure that you have some other Zoom to go to at 3:45 on the dot, as I usually do at the end of a meeting. So I just wanted to thank you, Chairman, so much for your leadership on these issues, for always keeping students at the forefront of the conversation and their welfare really in mind and in your focus, and for joining us here today to talk about the state of higher education. So go build back better. Let's get it done.
Well, we're going to do the best we can. Thank you, and Third Way.
Bye.